On December 8th, 1980, a man by the name of Mark David Chapman would go on to change pop culture forever. While standing outside of his Dakota apartment, Chapman would shoot John Lennon, killing him. The world would mourn and eventually would be clued in on what happened that night, leaving most of the public satisfied. But what if there was more to the story? Was Lennon killed by a lone man or by the US government? And was Chapman actually a mind-controlled MKUltra puppet? Find out as we explore the conspiracy of John Lennon's death. Hello everybody, welcome to the I'm Not Crazy podcast. My name is Andrew Venor, I'm your host, and today we are joined by a very important guest because he's been around for the entire time, but you haven't really seen him. You've heard him, right? You heard him. It's Chris.
Hello,
it's Chris
everybody.
Longo. I'm going to say your full name. It's Chris Longo.
Thank you.
Yeah.
It's Longueira.
Longueira. Yeah, that's fair. Yeah. I'm so used to saying Longo. Yeah.
Okay.
Christopher Longueira. Yeah. Longueira. I can't even say it.
Thank you. That is the proper enunciation.
That is the proper. Okay. Can you write a review? Just write a review. It helps a lot.
We would really like it.
Appreciate it.
It would be quite helpful.
That would be everything.
Subscribe, follow on TikTok.
Today, we are going to be speaking about the John Lennon conspiracy, obviously. There's going to be a lot of mind control. There's going to be a lot of drugs, forced drugs. It's going to be tad sexual abuse, just a little bit. Then there's going to be a lot of bullshit. So, the MKUltra stuff is a little heavy. It's a lot to get through. You're kind of wading through waters with it,
sure.
Right? Because it is very dense. There's a lot that happened, and I condensed it as much as I can. I was going to make this 2 episodes, but then I realized that I'm telling like 8 stories at once if I do that, and I can't do that. So I tried to make as much sense as possible. Okay, so
sure.
Bear with me, guys. All right, and girls.
Can I jump in and tell a story?
No.
Okay.
Yes.
I actually, on the way here, I was listening to Imagine. Because I was like, I have to get into, the groove of everything. And in first grade, I didn't actually know the Beatles first. I knew John Lennon first. And my first grade music teacher, she would do this thing where she would teach the class without, like, a voice. Like, she would, just, put on sounds or music, play instruments. And this is when I feel like the subject matter I did not understand in the song, but it was just such a beautiful song.
Well, Imagine.
She put on Imagine, and then I looked it up because I was like, wow, this is such a great song. And then I looked it up as a kid, and I saw John Lennon got assassinated.
Yeah.
I was
like, wow.
All right. Imagine
he didn't, right? When I was a kid, I actually didn't realize that they were all the same. Like they were the Beatles, because I heard like Let It Be and Imagine, they were both like piano songs. Sure. And I was like, wow, they're so similar, but like they're pretty different. And then like Piano Man was also in there with it, and there was like Journey songs where I was like, oh, they're all piano songs, and okay. I put them in their own category, which is really strange now looking back because none of them were related. Like Open Arms with Imagine, they both have pianos. I'm not going to talk about John Lennon in length. If you don't know who John Lennon is, just shut off the show.
Why are you watching the podcast? Why are you listening to the podcast?
Just do something with yourself. Like,
go on Wikipedia.
Yeah.
Right?
How do you not know? It's he's quite large in the world of everything. So we're going to start where most conspiracies start. Murder. Once again, on December 8th, 1980, John Lennon would leave his Dakota apartment at around 5 p.m., meeting a man on the way out. He would make small talk and sign a copy of Double Fantasy for the Man, which was the album that he put out at the time. This man was Mark David Chapman. Spoiler, he killed him. And he would wait outside his apartment for the next 6 hours, while Lennon and his wife Yoko finished up some music for Yoko's album. She was making an album at the time. Sure. It was a Scream album.
What else?
She asked Lennon, she said, can you come in and scream? And he said, absolutely. So he went in and screamed, and then after they were done screaming for 4 hours, and everyone in the booth was like, God damn it, I'm sick of this. They went to the Dakota again, so that he could get shot.
Unfortunately.
Yeah. Chapman shot Lennon in the back and the shoulder twice, killing him within 10 minutes. He was dead, which is kind of nuts. He then took out a copy of Catcher in the Rye and sat down on the sidewalk, reading it until he was apprehended by the NYPD, which is kind of psychotic. He shot him and then very calmly just kind of took it out of his pocket and was like, well, and just sat on the ground and just kept reading. and like people were going nuts around him, and he said that he had no recollection of anything that was going on around him. He said he was in his own little world, because in his head he was going to more or less like get transported somewhere else and be rewarded for what he did, or at least that's what he said in the beginning. Yeah. But that was the explanation at this time that was given for why he did that, which was really strange. The following days showed just how important of a figure that Lennon was. The world mourned, with huge crowds forming in Central Park and in front of the Dakota, and memorials being held worldwide. As many as 3 suicides are connected to Lennon's death, which is kind of nuts.
I didn't know that.
3 people killed themselves because John Lennon died.
Holy shit.
Yeah. I would say probably not a lot holding them there to begin with. To be fair, you know,
I mean, yeah, no,
you know, I would
John
say
Lennon's
that's a
the
very
breaking point. That's a little tough. I understand.
I would say there was a hair out of place on those, but it's okay. Chapman would plead guilty and receive a sentence of 20 to life for murder, never denying what he had done. He'd always basically come out and said, "I did it." You know, he would just change the reason very often.
Really? Okay.
Which plays into the conspiracy a little bit, which we were saying a lot. We will get to that later. Sure. The death is weirdly, like most conspiracies, the least important part of the actual conspiracy. The death is just the catalyst for people finding out about things and just pointing fingers and screaming. Okay. Otherwise, it gets so disconnected that it's almost like no one even cares that he's dead. It's just everyone's like, well, we got to figure out why he's mind controlled, and it's like, it's kind of nuts. Yeah. So I'm gonna talk about John Lennon, but I'm not gonna, like I said, I'm not really gonna get into it because the first sentence I wrote here is for those listening who have never watched, listened, or read to anything on planet Earth. John Lennon was one of the 4 Beatles and considered to be one of the most important musical groups of all time. John claimed that he was more popular than Jesus, which caused a worldwide sensation and stir. He probably was more popular than Jesus. Really, what we're going to get into is political views and his political message in his music and why he became a target for the CIA to begin with.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
And he would really amp up his political messages in his music and start to get more involved in social change, being part of many rallies in the name of peace worldwide. So, you know, the whole thing, John Lennon's always famous, Ringo is always doing it, peace and love, peace and love. They were all like on this peace and love thing. And it started in the mid-60s, like 65, 66.
Okay.
John and his wife, Yoko, would be seen as global activists protesting for peace and freedom, while also getting involved with activist groups such as the Yippies, the Black Panthers, and the IRA, all of whom were very disliked by the U.S. government. To be fair, you know, I would say all 3 of those, in most cases, are considered terrorist organizations at this point in time. Yeah. The Yippies were extreme hippies. They were like... They lived the lifestyle to the core, but they were also like militant, and they wanted to like take down the government so that they could then have everyone be peaceful, which is confusing. The Black Panthers and the IRA were just fighting against the government for, you know, just discrimination and all that fun stuff. Sure. And the government more or less was trying to find ties between John Lennon and them in any way they can to sabotage him.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. There was a lot of powerful leader, so like in a way. His influence is probably just like, they're probably just like, yeah, I don't know. We got to get away from him as soon as possible. They're
kind of shitting their pants a little bit.
Yeah.
Because they're like, this man is leading the children of the world to like, no one wants to do anything but sit in fields and smoke weed and like to play with each other's feet. It's really strange. Yeah. And like everyone's just running around and like people getting murdered because they're all hitchhiking and the world's going crazy and everybody's like, it's all John Lennon's fault. Or at least that's what the way the conspiracy makes it seem. Yeah. So his involvement with the IRA specifically is something that will come into play more and more. They kept trying to pin him to the IRA because he supported one of the main leaders of the IRA. Okay. And there is evidence that he funded the IRA at one point, but it might have been a very misleading funding. Like he didn't know he was actually going to the IRA. He thought it was going to like a charity, more or less.
Oh, okay.
As we said, the U.S. government did not take kindly to all this political activism, and the FBI and CIA would start secret surveillance on a large number of counterculture figures of the time, including Lennon. And with his ties to activist groups, the FBI feared his ability to mobilize the youth and create actual waves, as well as his ability to stay relevant and important. He went through one of the largest shifts in music ever, and he played a huge role in that shift. So he was important just as he was in 65, as he was in 75, and as he was in 80, if not more at that point.
Of course.
His popularity hadn't really waned. Like,
he's basically just a staple in society at that point.
Even though his music wasn't, it's almost like Conor McGregor. Like, he hasn't won a fight in I don't know how long, but people still look at him like he is the biggest fighter in the world, and it's crazy. He's on a very large loser. He hasn't won a fight in like 4 years.
He hasn't been seen in a while, so yeah, I get the analogy.
Yeah. Did you ever think I was going to do that to you? Throw some sports in you?
Well, no, UFC I could expect, but
Yeah,
if you brought out like who's someone like
Mike Piazza was fucking Peg and Sam champion.
Exactly.
I don't know if I can put that in, but I will. I'm going to put that in. Fuck it. There's nothing wrong with it. You peg whoever you like, but he probably did.
Yeah.
As we said, his ties with activist groups, they were afraid that he was going to mobilize the young people of the nation and more or less cause an uprising, which, to be fair, was, close if not happening, by the mid-70s. And they also did some things that weren't very secret. In 1971, Nixon worried that the impact of Lennon's movement could cost him his re-election, so he tried to deport Lennon, using his open drug use as one of the reasons. They put out wanted signs for Lennon all over the country. They sent them to police departments all over the country, and it said, the Pope is on dope, and it had Lennon laying back in like a creepy black and white picture with a joint in his mouth, and it had a list of the substances they thought he'd have on him. Which will come into play later, because some of those substances he probably had on him because he was given to him by the fucking CIA.
Exactly.
Which we'll get into that in a little bit. Though unsuccessful, this showed the interest and the fear that they had towards Lennon. It wasn't just a contempt that they had. It wasn't just he was going against a way of life that they believed in. They feared that he would cost them their livelihood, which, to be fair, worded that way, it's like, oh, poor Nixon, but fuck Nixon, And that attitude in that time period, which has led to the whole shit show that we have today. But again, not for this show. The Killer. The Killer is going to be not even the star. The star of this show is the CIA. So John Lennon got 2 paragraphs. Mark David Chapman gets 3. The government got 4 pages. So this is the CIA show. These guys are just pawns in the CIA's massive show of disgusting proportions.
Sure.
So, The Killer, Mark David Chapman, or Mark Chapman, I will switch, was born on May 10th, 1955 in Fort Worth, Texas, and spent his childhood terrified of his abusive father. As a kid, Chapman would create a very elaborate fantasy world where he was in control of tiny little people. Almost like Gulliver's I can't say it. Gulliver's am I having a hard time? Gulliver's Travels, showing very early signs of intense mental illness. So what he would do as a kid is he would lay in his room and he would imagine that he was like the god to a small little race of people that would live around him, and they would like give him they would vote for things for him to do as a democratic society because he hated communism, and they would vote for things for him to do, and then he'd do them.
Would he make the votes fair? How would he decide?
Well,
democracy?
There was one point where he feared a rebellion in his late 20s and slaughtered everyone.
Okay,
and then brought them back to life later on in life.
Okay, well, good for him.
When he was a teen, he would begin to experiment with drugs, and he would skip school. But he was able to hold a job and was even praised by his coworkers as a hard worker. Apparently, he hated school, but he actually really enjoyed working, and he enjoyed making his own money. But he was also just a fucking loser. So at this point, he was able to hold a job. But we'll see as the time goes on, people start to like him less and less, and it really starts to hurt him as a social person.
Okay.
He really goes into a very solitary state after a while.
I can believe that.
And it all starts when his friend, unnamed, would give him a book called Catcher in the Rye by J.D. Salinger.
I remember reading it in middle school.
You read it?
Yeah.
I've never read this book.
Yeah, I have read it. I couldn't really tell you the main synopsis, but
good thing I have one for you.
Yeah, let's do it.
This book had a huge effect on him. The book followed a 16-year-old boy named Holden Caulfield, who spent 2 days wandering around Manhattan trying to rebel against the adult world, only to be exhausted by it at the end. Chapman began to idolize Caulfield for whatever reason I don't really understand, because he was a loser. in the story.
In the story, yeah, I see the similarities between his life and the kid's life because it's
so did Mark. And
Yeah.
the problem was he really liked the similarities, and he was like, "I am Holden." And the problem when you do that is Holden isn't real.
He is a book
Holden
character.
is also 16,
Yes.
and he's in his 20s now. He was 27 when he killed Mark David Chapman. He is 11 years. He's almost double Holden. You know?
Mm-hmm.
The biggest thing that he did, from what I read of the synopsis of the book, was he got a prostitute, went into a hotel room, and then talked to her for an hour. That was the biggest thing.
Yeah.
Why is that the life you want to lead, Mark?
I remember specifically from that book, there's like a point in time where like he doesn't really know where he wants to go in life, and he's just sitting in a grass field just looking at the sky, and he's just wondering what to do. So honestly, Mark David Chapman, great job, good influence, man.
Well, at this point, Chapman's life started to hit a low point. He dropped out of college and his girlfriend left him, causing huge waves of depression. He would eventually attempt to kill himself in 1977 by attaching a hose to his car exhaust. But, of course, because, he had trouble doing everything, the hose melted and he survived, obviously. He started to drink heavily after this and began falling deeper into his own delusions and mental illness. And this would all boil over, obviously, when he killed John Lennon on that fateful night. This was your suggestion, so I want to give you the shout-out on the episode. This was his suggestion to cover this for the date. He gave me the date. This has been planned for like a month and a half.
But yeah, we were looking into the scheduling, and we saw December 8th was going to be like a Thursday or a Friday, so we were like, okay, you know what? Let's put it out on that day. It'll be perfect.
Now, we got the actual story out of the way.
Yeah.
Okay? Now, the actual story is that Mark David Chapman grew up mentally ill, murdered John Lennon because of multiple things that he can't really even pinpoint. And then he is still kind of fucked up now in prison, right?
Yeah.
For some people, that's not good enough,
Yeah.
And reasonably so, because as we're going to see, there is a very good reason why whenever someone is killed, people look at the FBI and the CIA for answers. And they just assume because they're political, it has to do with the U.S. government. And there's a reason for that. And we're going to get into that now. But it's not totally absurd how this formed. It's totally understandable how this whole conspiracy formed. Okay. It's just that you're going to see there's like two really strong points, but the bridge that connects them is just a single rope. It's just a very thin rope. If you're on the middle and you sneeze, you're falling off. It's not stable, you know? Okay. So it's just, it's really fun. It's not, the CIA is great. They stand for the caring internal America because they care for America internally. Okay, so with all that being said, now we're going to get into the government's involvement with this section called The Government's Involvement. Agencies such as the FBI and the CIA have always had a reputation for illegal activity in the name of national security, and the most common conspiracies revolve around drugs and murder, both which play here. Just going to keep that. The CIA having hands in some of the most important assassinations in American history is as American as baseball. I just wanted to include that.
Yeah, honestly, you needed to throw that in.
Honestly, again, when someone major, even just recently, there's the crypto guys that get killed. Yeah. Immediately, everybody's like the CIA.
Yeah, exactly.
And, we'll see why. When literally anybody gets killed, the CIA is the first agency that takes blame, and for good reason. Just saying JFK is enough to get my point across, but I'll give you a better, much less talked about example compared to JFK. It is very well talked about. Yeah. But it is a very good, solid example of a quote-unquote supposed, alleged CIA assassination of Martin Luther King Jr.
Okay.
On April 4th, not in the morning, fucking Bono. It was at night, you fuck. On April 4th, MLK was leaning over the balcony of the Lorraine Hotel speaking with Reverend Jesse Jackson when he was fatally shot one time in the face. I did not know that. He was shot in the cheek. It went through. It hit his spine, went down, and severed his jugular. So he basically died almost immediately. He lost consciousness immediately.
Yeah.
It was a professional shot.
Sure.
He was pronounced dead about an hour later. They opened up his chest. He just never woke back up. So he was pronounced dead an hour later. He was dead basically immediately. In the resulting days of the investigation, the man found to be responsible was James O'Reilly, an escaped convict. He was said to have shot MLK from across the street with the rifle and binoculars being with the rifle and the binoculars being found in a duffel bag blocks away with his fingerprints all over both of those. After pleading guilty to avoid the death penalty, Ray would start to speak of a conspiracy. According to him, he was helping a Cuban drug runner named Raul. That's his words.
Interesting.
He was said to be a blonde man. Sounds very Cuban to me.
Sure.
Who is the same man that helped him escape from prison. It seems like he helped him escape from prison and then employed him as a gun runner. So he would basically buy guns under an alias and give them to Raul. I am wrong. I'm sorry. I wrote earlier MLK was leaning over the balcony of the Lorraine Hotel. That is incorrect. The Lorraine Hotel was where James Earl Ray was supposedly from, where he was supposedly in when he shot him.
Okay.
I forgot the name of the hotel that Martin Luther King was at. But it was not the Lorraine Hotel. My bad.
Okay.
But anyway, he would buy the rifle, give it to Raul, and then he would be told to stay in the Lorraine Hotel in a specific place. He claims that he ran out of the hotel in fear of being found and was eventually pinned and used as a scapegoat. This theory actually has some merit, even though it sounds kind of nuts because, again, he's an escaped convict. He had a very long history of crime. He never murdered anybody. It was always theft and stuff like that. And he was not politically active. That's the thing. Is he had like no real reason to go after him other than, oh, he's a convict. He probably just did it just to do it.
Yeah.
And at the time, that type of logic would fly.
Yeah.
So I think that, me personally, I really do think he was killed. I don't think that it was... I think he was murdered by the CIA. I don't think that he did it.
It seems like something like easily to pin on, like you said, he's an escaped convict. So
Yeah.
it seems like an easy target to pin it on him.
And the fact that if you catch what I'm trying to say, the Cuban drug runner Raul is probably a CIA agent that helped him escape from prison.
Absolutely.
Like, it was a planned thing
Yeah.
to kind of get him in a position where people would be like, oh, fuck him, he's a wanted guy.
Yeah.
And he just killed Martin Luther King.
He thought he was doing something to help himself, and they probably had ulterior
Exactly,
motives.
exactly. Like, it doesn't excuse the fact that he was potentially, he thought that he was running guns for Cuba. Like, that's not good.
Yeah.
But, like, he probably didn't murder Martin Luther King.
Sure.
The room that Ray supposedly shot MLK from had a very large tree in front of it, making it impossible to take the shot from the angle he would have had to. The next day, after this, people started to yell this out because they started looking at the tree. People started coming over. They saw there was no damage to the tree. There was no, like, impact from a bullet. There was no, like, scrape, nothing. Yeah. And they were like, how could he have possibly shot him from this angle? And no joke, the next day the police cut the tree down, saying that it impeded the investigation, right? And in 1997, they had the rifle, because they supposedly found it, which I'm going to get into that in a minute.
Yeah.
But the gun and the bullet found in his body didn't match. In 1997, they did a ballistics report, and they said that the gun that he used, supposedly, the way it shot would have had very specific marks on the bullet from the rifling in the barrel. And basically, when they shot it, they did 12 shots. Every single bullet had that rifling consistent. That bullet did not. It wasn't even close. So it had to have come from a different gun. So there's so many things, and that's just scraping the surface. Again, this is not an episode of MLK for the third time. If you're interested, go do some independent research. It's really, like, it's crazy how unknown this is, because everyone talks about JFK, but JFK is so much harder to prove than this. This is, like, really, like, basically a cut and dry case that we're going to see in a second. So, if you didn't believe me and you feel like I'm going a little cuckoo here, the King family also believes that Ray was innocent, believing it to be a conspiracy between the CIA and the Memphis police chief with a ton of evidence behind it. Most of the evidence says that the police chief shot MLK. And that bag full of evidence from Ray was seen by the guy he dropped. It was supposedly dropped in front of a restaurant, but the guy that owned the restaurant said that the bag that was dropped was not dropped by Mark David Chapman. It was dropped by a man in a suit. So, like, it is very obvious that it was a setup.
Yeah, 100%. There's so much that's pointing to it. Oh my
It's
God.
unbelievable.
Yeah.
And MLK was being illegally surveillanced by the CIA, along with Lennon and many other activists. All this makes it very easy to point the finger, and many people do. But as we said, the CIA has been accused of drug manufacturing and distribution, and that's where our story goes from here. So next we're going to get into MK Ultra, and I start this with "This is all real," and I want to say that because whenever I get into a conversation with MK Ultra and I talk about it, I feel like I'm yelling this episode. I feel like I'm yelling the information at people because I'm a little angry at this. But
Sure.
MK Ultra is real. We have the Freedom of Information Act, right? In 1975, there was a Freedom of Information Act put towards the files for MK Ultra, which supposedly ended in 1973. The government acknowledged that it was real at that point, but they didn't say what it was, and they didn't declassify anything until the 90s. So there was a conspiracy legend that the government had this secret CIA program where they were trying mind control. And it's one of those things where it sounds so stupid, and it's like a stupid little conspiracy. And then in the 90s, a reporter went after it more and more. And I believe in like 2003, they declassified everything that they had. And it turns out that in 75, the first time, they got scared and shredded 90% of the evidence. So they found the other 10%, acknowledging that it was all real, but we don't know to a certain extent how successful they are. We have everything that they did, but we have all the itineraries and all the experiments and the dates and all that. We just don't have any further information about them.
Okay.
So we know what happened, we just don't know how far it went for certain things, right?
Sure.
After World War II, the U.S. was trying to beat out the Soviets and be the most prepared nation for what seemed like an inevitable war. So in 1951, the CIA started Project Artichoke, which was meant to research interrogation methods, but was actually studying the effects of mind control and hypnosis. So Project Artichoke was named so because apparently the director loved artichokes. They were his favorite vegetable.
Is that really true?
It seems like that's the consensus. The question became, quote, can we control an individual to the point where he will do our bidding against his will and even against fundamental laws of nature, such against self-preservation? So they basically were asking, can we break someone's brain so that we could program them to work for us, even if they don't even realize they're doing it? After the increased introduction of drugs into the project, it was renamed in 1953, 2 years later, to Project MK Ultra, which is such a better name, and was kept as secret as possible. The reason it's called MK Ultra was because Ultra is considered the highest rank of secrecy in that time. So they had a group that was put together called MK Delta, and they were in charge of MK Ultra, right? And these guys, I don't have names because fuck every single one of them. They're all garbage. And they are like, they did just straight up war crimes. They were killing people. They were killing soldiers by overdosing them with different drugs. Sure. It was nuts. Yeah. They kept everything going from 1953 all the way to 1973. This went on for 20 years. Okay? The experiments included electroshock therapy, hypnosis, sexual abuse, and other forms of torture while being drugged without consent with insane amounts of LSD and other drugs, sometimes killing the subject. There was a guy that killed because he was overdosed. They overdosed him on mescaline, which is an ungodly amount of mescaline is needed to overdose on it. Yeah. And they killed somebody with mescaline.
I see why they named the project after a vegetable.
This is MK Ultra. Artichoke happened already. Artichoke was like it was just look at the clock. It's going. Do you feel anything? They were like, no, sir, we don't. And they were getting like literally like barrels of LSD manufactured, and they were kept in offices, and these guys were dipping their hands in daily.
Oh my
God. Crazy shit. And as I said, they were being drugged with insane amounts of LSD without consent. They had no idea they were getting drugged half the time. And they had no idea. They would just be told, drink this, and they would take like a pill, and they would lace the water. So they would give them like a sugar pill and say it's we're testing like Tylenol or something. We're testing like whatever. Why can't I think of a single fucking thing? Ibuprofen. We're testing ibuprofen on the subject when it comes to swelling, right? Yeah. And then they'll give them like a sugar pill, and then in the water that they give them to drink the pill with is laced with acid. Oh. And they get crazy high, and then they just start doing crazy shit to them.
I know it says like you were saying misled volunteers.
So they would tell them that they were volunteering for. They would tell them that it was a government-run study. Okay. But it was illegal at this time even. Immediately to do human experimentation. So they had to trick them. So they would just lie to them, just straight up lie to them.
Oh my god.
Yeah. It's pretty nuts. It's very reminiscent. If you know the Tuskegee experiment,
okay.
The CIA went into I wouldn't even say predominantly black. They made a community of black men and infected them with syphilis, and told them that they were taking the bad blood out. And infected them with syphilis, and for 50 years, studied the effects of syphilis going through generations of black men specifically.
Sure.
And they infected hundreds and killed like 20 people.
Yeah.
Like, it's insane. And it came out, and the CIA is still a thing. So, with all these experiments were mostly done on prisoners, active military, and, like I said, misled volunteers. Yeah. The main point of this was to try to break someone's mind to the point of creating a total obedient subject to then be used for covert missions, such as, assassinating a civil leader, such as John Lennon. The subject would then be used as a scapegoat because they had no memory of what was happening. And though the project was closed in 1973, many believe that the experiments held over the 20 years were successful, and many of these sleeper agents are just kind of still being manufactured by the government. And the reason that people think it worked to an extent is because very rarely do government projects get funded for 20 years if nothing's happening.
Sure.
So, like, if they didn't have any breakthroughs, they wouldn't be getting funding. Because though, like, the result is all people care about, how you're getting it is obviously being overlooked right now, they're also not going to fund something because they'd rather just pocket the money at that point.
Exactly. Yeah.
It was, like, very corrupt. The CIA is unreal with corruption. It's nuts.
Yeah, no, I'm getting a good lesson on it right now. Absolutely.
Yeah, it's kind of absurd. It's to a point where they're totally, basically out of control during this point. The guy that they have in charge, he is a chemist, and he was the head chemist of the whole thing.
Sure. And
he would lace people's stuff with, like, have you done acid?
I haven't.
Okay. So I've never done acid either. I've done, like, mushrooms. I've never done acid. I've always been intimidated by it.
Sure.
And as someone who's never done it because they're intimidated, but so many of my friends have done it, yeah. It's one of those things that they were giving them like 30 times the dose. They were giving them like 50 doses at a time. This guy's name is Frank Olson, and he worked for the CIA, had a hand in MK Ultra, but from what it sounds like, didn't really understand. It was early on. It was he died in 1953, so he was part of Artichoke. And he was, I think, against the turn towards drugs as the experiment went on. He saw that it was getting a little crazy. And they had a party, and they dosed him. And it fucked him up. He went nuts. 5 days later, he fell out of a window in Manhattan that had a gate on the window.
Okay, yeah.
So now that we have all the pieces, we're going to start to make the puzzle, and we're going to see how David Chapman was supposedly a sleeper agent, and how Lennon was targeted by the CIA. Okay. So this part is all speculation, and none of it is real. Wink, wink.
Wink, wink.
Okay. Though Lennon wasn't the only musician to be targeted by the government, it would seem he was one of their main focuses between the Nixon and the Ford administrations. The first attempt to get rid of him, as we stated earlier, was to deport him through legal, quote-unquote, means, though it was obviously unsuccessful, and this was the first sign of interest in silencing Lennon publicly. The reason that he wanted to silence him was because he had a campaign coming up, and Lennon made a comment against the campaign, so Nixon said deport him.
Wow.
Yeah, Nixon was he was a psycho.
Yeah, no, that sounds like he wanted to have as much control as possible over this.
Yeah, a little bit. Nixon was famous for wanting control.
Yeah, he was a pretty corrupt guy.
Another attempt to suppress Lennon and the entire movement in general, being like the freedom, love, hippie movement, was by distributing drugs into the music scene. Lennon himself was strongly addicted to heroin starting in the mid-60s, making some to believe that Lennon was a target of this. And through his public use of drugs, his fans would start to also take drugs, taking the wind out of the movement, which is exactly what happened to the hippies. And surviving MKUltra files allude to the CIA being directly involved with that. So basically, they saw the hippie movement was rising in the early 60s. They didn't have a name for it yet, but there was a bunch of young people gathering in places like California and upstate New York, where basically, like, the two places, like, it was the Summer of Love in California, and then there was Woodstock in New York. Those were the two big places for hippies, right?
Gotcha.
During that time, the CIA was aware of what was happening, and they started to more or less manufacture drugs like coke and heroin and gave them to the artists. They would become addicted, and then they would in turn, because everyone was in the same scene, give it to fans, and fans would become addicted. And that is exactly what happened. Yeah. We saw it with Janis Joplin. We saw it with Jimi Hendrix. We saw it with the Rolling Stones. We saw it with the Beatles. We saw all those major bands all got into drugs. And there is like an insane amount of stories. I'm cutting ahead of myself a little bit, but it's okay. There's an insane amount of stories saying that like most of these musicians didn't take it the first time voluntarily. They were all dosed by random people. Wow. Yeah, it's crazy. John Lennon was dosed by a dentist. He went to a dentist and was dosed, and this dentist was obviously working with the CIA.
Of course, yeah, and it just seems so simple too. Like they did it in the most simplistic ways that even
they would just put it in water.
The artists didn't know, and the fans would never know.
It was crazy, and they just thought that they had these connects to these drugs, and they just thought it was people making them, and it wasn't. It was they were CIA just giving it to them.
Yeah.
According to writer A.E. Hotchner, what a fucking name. He's I just want to say, he is a very acclaimed author. He is part of Newman's Own, which is Paul Newman's charity company. He's the second half of Newman's Own, so that's number one. So that he does this, so that's good. With his salad dressing, he's saving the world one dressing at a time. And number two, he's like an acclaimed journalist, and people. He has 2 documentaries about counterculture figures at the time. And those documentaries are acclaimed for being some of the best documentaries of that time, apparently.
Okay.
I don't know if they're books. I think they're books. I'm sorry, biographies, not documentaries, biographies. Gotcha. So, in one of the books that he wrote at this time, it was called Blown Away, The Rolling Stones and the Death of the 60s. It claims that he had been told by a very trusted source that Robert Lashbrook, the assistant director of MKUltra, sent agents to London, 65-ish, I want to say 65. He sent them to dose and distribute LSD to musicians. So basically, he sent them and they would dose them first to be like, did you like that, though? That was pretty cool, right? You want more? Yeah. And then he would give them more.
Yeah. You like it?
Yeah. This is backed up by Lennon himself, which again said that his first trip was involuntary and it was given to him by a dentist. Apparently, Paul said, I went to this dentist. If you need something, go there. And he went and the guy drugged him. And I don't know if that is also the first time Paul did it, but if it is, that's kind of even more crazy.
Yeah.
And I know this seems crazy, but MKUltra documents survive and point to this type of behavior, coupled with hundreds of first-hand accounts from test subjects. They were sued multiple times by people because they were like, hey, it turns out you did, like, nerve damage, and, like, I have, like, irreparable mental problems because, can I have something from it? Like, what the fuck? And most of them didn't get anything.
Yeah, I was going to say, they probably said, nope.
Even the infamous Unabomber, Ted Kaczynski, has been linked to MKUltra experiments during his time at Harvard. He was accepted into Harvard when he was 16 years old. He was brilliant. So the story goes that he was recruited by scouts that were going to Cornell, Harvard, and the top schools of the time, and basically taking people that they saw as brilliant to work in the program. Ted Kaczynski being one of them, who claimed he was dosed with LSD also, which coupled with the mental illness that he had, he was schizophrenic, I believe. He was that would be the worst thing to do to him.
Extremely detrimental.
Almost definitely, if this is true, led to him being the Unabomber.
Yeah.
Because his family said before he went to college, he was like not a normal kid. He was weird as fuck. He'd always smell like milk, apparently. But it was just the whole thing,
Sure.
When putting all this together, it logically points to a scary realization. And I say this with love in my heart and allegedly. The U.S. government has been secretly feeding drugs into the U.S. population for years and has caused damage in the meantime. And this is not just with LSD. It includes crack in the 90s, coke and heroin in the 80s, and the list goes all the way back to the early 40s, it turns out, with the OSS.
No way.
Yeah.
I had no idea.
Yeah, I went down a fucking rabbit hole. Yeah. I'm reading stuff. This episode, I did 2 weeks, and I would say half of the research I didn't include because I was just doing a documentary on the CIA. And I was like, this isn't what I'm doing. Yeah. In black neighborhoods in the 90s, They were giving them crack to distribute, specifically because they were afraid of civil unrest and wanted to make sure that people literally just couldn't do anything because they were high. Yeah. Like, it's unfucking real.
It's unbelievable the amount of, like,
fuckery.
You don't even realize, but the amount of things that they've, gone through to make sure everything stays calm.
It is
we have all the control. Yeah.
It's so scary. And now this is where Chapman comes in, finally. So, I'm going to be honest with you, right? We went through a lot of this, right? We didn't even really get to the whole fucking conspiracy that this episode's about.
I know, yeah.
Which is crazy.
I'm excited.
I'm not.
Okay.
So, This is when the story gets a lot less concrete. And this is where I will say, for the record, this is where my brain stops. Right? So, this part is called He Looks to Be Programmed, and we will see why in a minute. So, as we stated earlier, Chapman spent some time in his late teens and early 20s being involved in politics, also showing a very heavy anti-communist view. Like, annoyingly so, apparently. Sure. He would just talk about it constantly. Oh, I hate communists. Like, shut up. You're fine. You're in the U.S. Shut up. You know?
Probably told his little democracy about it as well.
I believe that he was afraid that they were going to rebel and become communist. I don't know if that's true. That's true, but I don't know if that's true. So, now, he was very involved with the YMCA. Have you heard of them? Don't stop it. Stop it. Stop it. I was hoping you wouldn't do it. And in 1974... he would take part in an exchange program through the YMCA, where you get to apply to a country and you get sent to there if they can. Guess what Chapman applied to? Don't read. You read it.
I didn't read it. No, I swear I didn't.
Applied to?
Where did he apply?
Hates communism, right?
Yeah.
Soviet Union. Why? You know?
He wanted to go fight with them.
This is seen to be very strange considering his intense opposition to communism. Well, what if there's more to the story? He actually ended up getting put in Beirut, which was also communist at the time.
Sure.
There's more to the story. It would turn out that the CIA has been accused of funding the YMCA offices all over the world.
Really?
Yeah, apparently. To then use them as offices to run experiments and to get people to recruit through.
Okay, that's pretty believable, actually.
It gets even more believable.
Okay.
This may sound crazy, but there's some truth to it. According to Fenton Bresler, author of Who Killed John Lennon, quote, the United States Youth Council, a non-profit coalition of organizations that served youth, operated from 1945 to 1989. The United States Youth Council had 16 members, one of which was the YMCA. And it turns out that in 1967, why do I keep saying United States? The New York Times revealed that 90% of the funding for the USYC came from the CIA, and they were actually controlling the agenda and marketing for the YMCA.
Wow.
So this is the two things, right? Yeah. I really think that the CIA killed some people. I really think they were giving drugs to people, right? And I really think that they were doing this, right? This is the two problems here, right? This program wasn't the only program that Chapman was involved with the YMCA. He stayed at the Y's hostels while he traveled back in the 70s because he did a little traveling when he was having his mental breakdowns. That's how he ended up in Hawaii. Okay. And he even volunteered to go to a Vietnamese refugee camp with the Y. Conspiracy theorists believe that during this decade or so he was involved in the YMCA. The CIA was secretly drugging him and turning him into a sleeper agent. First time we use the word, I believe. I don't think that is. So Manchurian candidate. Oh my God, I can't say the word. Manchurian Candidate gets thrown around a lot because there was a movie called The Manchurian Candidate where an all-American kid with an all-American family, you know, he gets made into a sleeper agent and kills someone for the government. It's literally the exact story, except they leave out the mental world of little tiny people. Once he was a sleeper agent, then the CIA would just have to wait for the right target for Chapman, leading to the next point. Chapman was actually not an obsessive Lennon fan. So this is something that I found to be really fascinating. I had no idea. I always thought he was obsessed with John Lennon. Turns out he had a list of people. According to Chapman himself, he liked the Beatles and Lennon's music, but he had a list of people and just chose Lennon randomly. He had Ronald Reagan was on there. It was a bunch of actors, musicians, and politicians, more or less. And that list is people also point to as being more or less like his list given to him by the CIA.
Sure. Yeah.
Which is a weird thing to give someone that you're mind controlling, because that's weird evidence to leave behind. Just a list of fucking people, but
Is there any togetherness with like Reagan with the shooting? Does that have any?
No.
No, that was separate.
I don't know if people claimed that he was a Manchurian Candidate. I think people just claimed that he was nuts.
It's interesting because like I was under the impression, I feel like every time I've heard about the assassination, it's really just like, oh, he was an obsessive fan. So
that's always what people go with, and it's not the case. I think that it's easy to go with that narrative because he waited outside the hotel for 6 hours. He brought the vinyl of Double Fantasy to get it signed. He got it signed, which there are pictures of. It's kind of fascinating. He signed it right on Yoko Ono's neck.
Really?
Weird. Yeah, so at this time, basically, what people feel is that he was involved with the YMCA for like a decade, and during that time, he was being drugged and secretly mind controlled by the CIA. That's the string that I was talking about before.
Yeah.
Because realistically, how the fuck are you going to prove that? How? How? There's no way.
Yeah.
And there's never been, this is the problem with the theories, there's never been anyone that comes out and is like, hey, I got fucking, it turns out I went into the YMCA to play some basketball and they drilled into my fucking corneas, you know, to see if I could see through walls. And it's like, that didn't happen. So like, I don't know. Or maybe it did. Maybe I just didn't find it. But if you combine this with the testimony of the NYPD officers who arrested and dealt with Chapman directly, they claimed that he seemed programmed. And you have a recipe for the conspiracy. Chapman himself has changed the reason for killing Lennon multiple times over the years, convincing conspiracy theories that this is due to him just not really understanding why he did it, because he was on mind control from MK Ultra.
Sure.
But at the end of the day, we will never find out, because if there's one thing that the CIA is good at, it's not really getting in trouble for anything. And yeah,
what were his reasons that he kept changing?
Originally he said that he didn't do. Originally he said that he did it because he became a fan of John Lennon, which also probably played into the fan thing.
Sure.
He became a fan of John Lennon and idolized his words, and then when he saw the life he lived and that he had so much money and that it was basically going against everything that he spoke about. John Lennon had a diamond encrusted car.
Okay, so at this point, I meant to say that John Lennon had the most expensive car. For some reason, I said diamond encrusted. It was not diamond encrusted. It was a Mercedes-Benz 600 Pullman, which was at the time the most expensive car in the world. So sorry about that. Back to the show.
And he was telling people, imagine there's no government, imagine there's no money, and he has a diamond encrusted car. So like it rubbed people the wrong way. Yeah. Such a wrong way, it turns out, that he killed them. And he basically blames like his lifestyle and finding out about that. He felt betrayed, so he killed them.
That's fair. Yeah.
Then after that, he claims he didn't do it for that. He didn't do it for fame. He did it because he's mentally ill.
Okay.
Then he went back to the other thing again. And then today, he basically just says he regrets killing him. He killed him, but he did it for fame. But he still seems confused. I'm going to attribute the confusion to him being confused in general. Because he's really obviously very fucked up. Like he's a very fucked up man, and he's had a very fucked up life. And there's a degree of sympathy that I have, but also like, you know, you didn't need to shoot somebody for it.
Exactly.
But you know, maybe the little people told him to do it. And also, just a little fun.
They probably voted for it.
That's yeah, they did because they weren't a communist society.
Yep.
Fun fact: John Lennon almost got killed in October, not December, because he went to New York in October. And when he was in New York, he went to go see a movie. And halfway through the movie, he said there was something that clicked in his brain, and he didn't want to kill John Lennon anymore, which also plays into the theory a little bit. I don't know why I didn't write that in. I forgot about that. But that kind of plays into the theory a little bit also. But it turns out that when you're mentally ill, you also have switches flipping in your brain because it's messing up.
Of course.
You know? So if I feel like if he was a sleeper agent and they wanted him to kill John Lennon, right? Why would they like turn him on and like send him all the way to New York and then just be like, go watch a movie, and then halfway through just be like, and shut it off, and then make him just go all the way home? That's so suspicious.
Yeah, no,
you know, like
that doesn't
suspicious.
It doesn't add up.
Yeah, I think he was mentally ill.
Yeah,
I believe Mark David Chapman killed John Lennon and did it due to a combination of mental illness and attention seeking. He was obsessed with being famous and felt inadequate, so he killed a star to become one. As for MK Ultra's involvement, I highly doubt there was any, truthfully. I truly believe that MK Ultra, along with the CIA, helped spread drugs across the nation for a reason spanning from power to money, and also believe that they have killed many people to help keep their actions a secret. But I don't believe that this applied to Lennon, and this is the most important reason for this. At the end of the day, people like Martin Luther King Jr. were the leaders of change, while Lennon was just a supporter to the leaders. He wasn't an actual leader of change.
Yeah.
He was supporting groups that were already established and leading themselves. He would just give them their blessing.
Absolutely, yeah.
And though that was very important and it was influential and all of that, I don't think the government would kill him, because I just don't think that they would put themselves on the line to kill John Lennon, when realistically, even though it seemed like he was a threat, in reality, the narrative that John Lennon could have mobilized the youth against the government is not true.
Yeah,
It wasn't John Lennon doing that. It was the government doing it to themselves by going to war and doing the exact opposite of what the American people wanted in that moment.
Yeah.
It wasn't John Lennon. John Lennon was just one of the people in America that wasn't happy about it.
Yeah. And like you said, like he's just giving support, but like that's the thing. Like when you think of like someone like Martin Luther King, you symbolize him with
Change.
John Lennon,
You think of a guitar player.
Exactly. I'm thinking of him for his music, not his support.
Yeah.
And like
those,
I totally get that.
You know, music from the time that he made, and when he was, you know, even other people at the time, like Fortunate Son, like all the songs that were really big for Vietnam, and they were very important. It was a cultural moment. But it wasn't that specific song that did it. It was the combination of all of the things happening at once. And I think that that's what gets missed in this story, is that there was more things happening. And realistically, by this point, John Lennon wasn't a hippie. No one was a hippie. It was 1980. So the hippie movement was done. It was dead in 1979 or 69. Yeah. Like the hippie movement did not make it into the 70s. Like things like Marilyn Manson, things like Charles Manson, who people also say was an MK Ultra agent. You know, all the serial killers coming into the 70s. That really put a damper on fucking let's sit in a field and you know go like this while we're fucking high as fuck staring at trees. Like it really does put a damper on that. You know?
Absolutely, yeah.
And I would say the government didn't kill him, but I'm very sure the CIA wasn't very upset that he died. Yeah. And I would say probably the fact that after he was killed, there was the Freedom of Information Act that was put towards, there was a case to get the paperwork from a dossier that they had. Yeah. And it literally says subject John Lennon on it. It's on the FBI website. I read it. It's like, I didn't read it all. It's like 200 pages. Yeah. And they redacted like 10 pages. And in those 10 pages, people claim that's where it is that they killed John Lennon. I don't believe that's true because MK Ultra didn't exist in 1980. And though I believe that there were, again, a degree of success that happened, I don't think that the success was that they were able to make sleeper agents. I think the success was that they were able to manufacture and figure out a way to make drugs and keep it a worldwide economy going so that they could have a continuous funding for things like weapons and things that make them absurdly powerful more than they need to be.
Yeah.
I don't think it's like a crazy, like, supernatural, we're going to take over the world with mind control. I think it's just a very normal, you know, we're going to take over the world with money.
It seems like the CIA just probably woke up one day and like saw John Lennon got murdered. And they're like, "Wow, we didn't even have to do anything."
That's literally after this whole thing. I went a full circle. I went from they didn't do it to holy shit they did it to they didn't do it. Yeah. And I really do feel like they woke up that day.
We walked into this one.
Yeah. And that's it. That concludes the conspiracy of John Lennon's death.
Wonderful. Let's go.
And imagine there's no bullet.
No religion, too.
So that's the conspiracy of John Lennon's death. This episode's a little weird. Got into some more conspiracy stuff with the MK Ultra. I love that.
Absolutely.
But I will say, lately we've been doing a lot of episodes, and I miss fucking monsters. I miss my monsters.
I hear you.
So we're gonna be doing some monster episodes coming up, and I'm really excited about it. We got a very fun Christmas episode coming, which I'm very excited. And then the first month of the new year, we're gonna do a little fun month-long thing, which will be, you know, you'll see that. January.
It's in the works.
It's in the works, you know. So thank you so much for watching. Please make sure that you go and you fucking do all the things. If you're on YouTube, if you want to watch all the stuff, TikTok, it's gonna start doing stuff, and then you should write a review. Again, thank you so much for watching. This was a really fun topic, even though it was confusing, and I'm sorry I missed a week because I looked at the schedule wrong, and I didn't realize that there was a week in between the third week of November and the first week of December, it turns out, because of how the week was broken up. So I just totally skipped it, and I didn't mean to do that. So, sorry everyone that's waiting. Everyone have a great day.
Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it.
You were great.
Thanks,
you were
man.
fantastic.
Yeah. No, I learned a lot today.
Yeah, I appreciate it.
Yeah, it was great.
And if you have, I haven't asked this in a while, but I feel like I have more people that listen now than when I used to ask. So if you made it this far, thank you. If you have any stories that are like creepy, or you have anything like real life stories that happen to you, whether they're paranormal or not, I don't really care. If they're good, just type me up an email and send it. The email is in the notes of the episode, whether you're watching it on YouTube. It's there on every episode. So if you ever think of something, just email it there, send it, whatever. I'm probably not going to answer, but I'm compiling them, and I want to make an episode where I have a bunch of these stories. So if you get to that, please do that also.
I feel like if it makes it easier, they could even you could like DM on Instagram and TikTok as well. We'll
That's
try
right,
to look
yeah.
at the messages too.
The Instagram is probably not going to be as active as the TikTok. Honestly, I don't use Instagram. I use TikTok. Chris is going to be doing most of the TikTok stuff. So I would say worry about the TikTok for now, and we will we'll try to get the Instagram later. But fuck them, and that's it. So thank you so much. Have a great night, and watch out, you're gonna fall.